Hi, welcome back to the channel and my review for Night of the Living Dead from George A. Romero in 1968. So with the release of 28 Years Later coming out soon, I'm so excited about that release. I thought I would do some reviews for some of my favourite movies in the zombie genre. It's one of my favourite types of horror. So of course had to start back with this classic Night of the Living Dead. And all credit to George A. Romero because he effectively created and invented the zombie genre as we know it today. I think technically before that there were movies that had things that you would call zombies in them, but in terms of what we know as like modern day zombies, the undead coming back to life, hunting and stalking people down in order to eat their flesh whilst they're still alive, that all began back nearly 60 years ago with Night of the Living Dead, and obviously it's gone on to inspire so many different films after that. Even if you think of huge shows like The Walking Dead and everything, that all started back here with this movie. So the story here, we're following this small group of characters who all don't really know each other, and they're basically brought together through circumstance, being chased by the undead and whatnot, and are brought together into this small farmhouse where it's a fight for survival. They've got to barricade the place up and basically work out a plan of action as all of these zombies start to close in on the farmhouse around them. So for this most recent rewatch, I did actually watch the version that is currently up on Shudder. And it's just like a really nice transfer of the film, nicely restored. It's still in black and white, but it just looks gorgeous. They've done it in the old original aspect ratio, the kind of boxy version of it. And it just looks amazing, because the last time I saw this, and I've only seen the movie once before, but it was on a very old version of the DVD that was done in colour, but the quality was just absolutely dreadful. So it did bring down the viewing experience a bit. But it's interesting because this movie has tons of different cuts out there. That's why they're all slightly different in length. Because I think when it came out, there was a lot of issues with the content. That was too explicit, too extreme for the time. So lots of the more sort of cannibal scenes have been cut out, and then other bits have been put back in, and then the film has been streamlined in other ways. So there's all sorts of versions out there of the film right now, but it seems like this one on Shudder is the kind of best version at the moment you can watch. I think one of the main things that makes this film feel so special and iconic in movie history is George A. Romero. He definitely had a talent for creating a story that felt big and epic in scale, despite the fact that it was made on such a small budget. Like, if you look at the history of this film, it was really made on a shoestring budget, no known actors. Obviously you can see it was shot on really secluded locations. They had a small number of extras. But it's just the way it's directed, it's the way it's edited, and all of the little details that are put in the film just make it feel very grand in scale. Like, if you think about the TV network they have in there, and it's their kind of communications from the news media outlets, and they're kind of all speculating about how the outbreak happened, and they're meeting with scientists and people in the military. It's small things like this that really immerse you in the story and make you feel like you are watching the end of days, like you're going through a real apocalypse, and you do kind of just forget that you're watching this tiny budget movie with a group of characters in a house and a few people dressed as zombies outside. You forget about all that because the movie just does such a nice job of making the whole thing feel so real, and I just think George A. Romero was an absolute master at doing that. I just love these kind of situations depicted in movies as well. It's right up my street where, you have some kind of apocalyptic event that ends up bringing together a group of people who would never normally have to interact in everyday life, and they have to basically find a way to put aside all of their differences and work together just in order to survive. And I find it really exciting to watch, but also fascinating as well, because obviously for most people in our everyday lives, we'll never have to deal with a situation like this. But it's just interesting to see and speculate about how people might deal with this kind of situation when the most antagonistic sides of ourselves would come out, and you see when people are in a state of panic how they no longer will act rationally, and they're just doing anything they can to try and make sense of the situation, you know, when the survival instincts are kicking in. And I just find it, as I say, I just find it absolutely fascinating to watch. And I think this movie does a really nice job of showing that. It's also just that kind of the claustrophobic setting of the farmhouse really helps with that as well. Just these people who have no idea what's going on around them. Like, this has seemingly all happened overnight, and they're all kind of barred up inside this house together, no idea of when this thing's going to end, and all they can see is these, you know, a group of undead crawling in around them. It's just an absolutely nightmarish scenario. One of the interesting things I think about the zombie subgenre in horror is it's easily one of the bleakest. You know, because when you think of other types of horror, I do find for the most part, they'll often end, not necessarily on a happy note, but definitely with a sense of resolution or some kind of hope going forward. Whereas there's definitely a common running theme with zombie movies that it's kind of set in stone that the world is done for at this point. You know, when zombies have overtaken, have overrun, it is just down to this final group of survivors living out their final days and watching how they deal with the situation. And there really is no resolution. And obviously this was started in Night of the Living Dead, and it's just quite interesting to see a movie now from so long ago that was very dark and nihilistic and brutal in its approach to that, where, you know, everything down to that ending as well, which I won't spoil just in case you haven't seen it, but just really harsh stuff, very, very brutal, and a very kind of dark and bleak movie, but definitely refreshing to see a story told like that, especially from so long ago. This movie, of course, also did get a lot of criticism back when it came out for the level of violence and gore that was shown here. And obviously it's on another level to the level of extremity of violence we get now in films, where they're not even comparable at all. But I definitely think for the era this came out, you know, in the late 1960s, this film does feel very extreme for that time. I kind of forgotten, you know, some of the scenes of the zombie eating, like, you know, where they have the couple and they're kind of really showing them chewing on bones and flesh and stuff. It does feel very extreme for this time period, and I can't, off the top of my head, think of another movie that showed violence in this way. And there's definitely some scenes, especially towards the end with the family and everything, definitely some pretty brutal stuff in here. So I can kind of understand to some extent at the time why they felt like they needed to put kind of censorships on this movie. As I said, I won't spoil the ending of the movie, but I think it is interesting to look at that ending in particular, especially at a time that, you know, this came out towards the end, or if not even at the end of the civil rights movement. It probably would have been unusual to see a black actor in a leading role as like your hero of a movie. And when you get to that final scene, I'm sure that did raise a lot of discussion around the kind of politics at the time and stuff. So it is interesting, you know, George A. Romero obviously at an early time liked to put some social commentary and some food for thought there in his movies outside of just, you know, the immediate situation of this being a zombie horror film. I only really have a few negatives about the movie, and they really do come down to those budget limitations. You know, some of the acting at times is a little bit distracting. Even when the characters are likeable, like Ben, the lead character, he's actually a really likeable guy, and he's the one that's kind of proactive, dealing with the situation kind of calmly, but you feel like he's got a good heart as well, even though he's really firm with everyone else there in the house and kind of takes the leadership role. But at times I think some of the acting is maybe a little bit off, and yeah, it just feels a little bit jarring. It doesn't have the natural flow. Like, you know, some of George A. Romero's later zombie films, you could definitely tell they had better actors that were better at kind of just immersing you and not having those little moments that take you out of a situation, because it just feels like a person trying to act. And I think there are definitely moments in Night of the Living Dead that pull you out as a result of that. Like some of the effects work as well. There's a scene when the group are walking past one of the barricaded barricaded windows, and you've got some of the zombies all reaching in, and one of the guys has got a knife and he's kind of stabbing away at these arms, and there's a shot where you see one of the arms kind of falling apart and it looks like a dodgy bit of paper mache falling apart. And it's moments like that where they haven't done enough in the editing to kind of cover that up. There's too much light on it. The shot's on there for too long, so you start to see some of the weaknesses there. And that doesn't go for all of it, because some of the effects work is done really nicely and they cover things up appropriately just to leave a lot of it to your imagination, which is how you do a film like this best. But there are definitely a few distracting moments. You can tell this film's age in other ways as well. Like, I definitely think the depiction of the female characters, like the women here are mainly here to look pretty or to be in a state of panic for most of the running time. And obviously, it's a sign of the times. I get things were very different, but it's not so much about that. It's more you just don't feel like you get to know them as much as characters. Like, their personalities aren't well developed, so they're just kind of there. You don't really get to know them the same way that you do the male characters. So then their kind of character arcs or some story about them definitely needed way more fleshing out here, I think. But yeah, I absolutely love this movie. I really do think it is quite a staggering piece of work, especially given the time that this came out in as well. There really wasn't much else out there like this. And I think even now watching it, it stands up really well against other more modern horror zombie movies as well. It's really intense, it's tightly paced, and highly recommended to anybody who's never seen this before. Even if you're someone who's a little bit reluctant to kind of go back to the 60s, watching an old zombie movie, trust me, give this one a go. You won't regret it. It's still a brilliant horror movie. So I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 5 rating. But guys, that is my thoughts on Night of the Living Dead. Please do let me know what you think of this movie in the comments if you've seen it. And as I said, I will be reviewing a load more zombie movies in the coming weeks as well. So stay tuned for that, and subscribe to the channel if you've been enjoying my content. So thank you so much for watching. Do take care, and I'll see you next time.